There are wells that draw water, and wells that draw names. I know the difference now. I came to Lekar in a rain that made the streets forget their shape. The sea had been chewing on the town for so long that even the stones tasted of salt. Doors wore their good luck like scabs. Little red pebbles set neatly on thresholds, each one beaded with water that would not soak in. They were not charms so much as admissions. The living here had learned to leave small offerings where the dark might stub its toe. I walked with the hood pulled low and the harp silent on my back. When the gods stop singing, a man learns to hear other music, the way a signboard creaks on its last hinge, the way the wind speaks in a key that was never tuned. That is how I found the house they call the Knotted Cot. I did not need directions. The storm pointed me like a finger. The inn sign was a plank of salt-burned oak with a simple thing burned into it, a knot any sailor would recognize, any child could tie and not untie, the sort that keeps a coffin shut when the cart goes over ruts. The plank swung and muttered to itself. The rope above it never moved. I took that as greeting enough, and went in. Inside, heat pooled in corners like sleeping cats. The air smelled of vinegar and opium and the mold that grows where two old walls have been pressed together, longer than either remembers. Behind the counter stood the man who kept the house, Grivven Tash, and he had the look of a wick burned to the last fat inch. His eyes were the clouded color of milk left under a winter sky. I could not say if he had ever blinked, or if the world had simply learned to move between his stares. "Weather's wet enough to drown a gull standing," he said, and it might have been a joke if his mouth remembered how to smile. "I've slept in worse," I answered. "I'll take a bed." He cocked his head, not toward me, but toward the ceiling, the beams, the nail heads, as if they were the ones who had asked, and I had only spoken out of turn. "One bed," he echoed, listening to the grain of the counter under his fingertips. "One breath, one knot, a thin curl of lip. Desperation tax applies in a storm." I set coin down. He did not look at them so much as weigh them with the pads of his fingers, judging not their metal but the tremor in my hand. He pushed one back with a hooked nail. "Don't pay for dreams you can't afford," he said. Something shifted then. Beneath the floor near the back, not the scurry of rats, not the soft lap of water, a single drawn creak like a bow across the lowest string of a broken instrument. I had walked long enough with endings to know the sound of a thing that waits to be fed. "You have rats," I said, "because sometimes it is a kindness to pretend you both still live in the same world." "No," Grivven said. "We have a knot." The common room had a shelf where bundles hung in twine like dried herbs, except they were not herbs. Teeth, each wrapped with a careful hand and labeled, the ink brown to the color of old scabs. Most men collect money. Some collect sins. Grivven collected endings in a way he could count. I have known priests who would be jealous of such an altar. He gave me a brass key. "Back room," he said. "Keep your shoes by the door. Don't step on the seam." "What lies tied?" I asked. "What lies?" he said without looking at me. Then he turned those milk eyes to mine and added, "Sleep careful." The room he rented me had nothing in it that wanted to be remembered. A cot, a table, a basin turned sullen under a chipped ewer, but the floor had a secret the walls had not yet learned to keep. There was a hairline rectangle traced in the boards beneath a second cot, pushed back against the far wall. a seam so thin you might have mistaken it for a line in the wood, if your hand had not told you it was warmer than the rest. Someone had marked the headboard with a circle, chalked and rubbed and chalked again until the wood itself had learned the shape. An empty eye with 9 little cuts around it like lashes worn down to scars. When I laid my palm on the seam, the wood was warm, not fever warm, breath warm, so close to a heartbeat the skin of my hand tried to remember the last time I had held another's pulse for the sake of comfort and not for the count. Memory is its own kind of seam. It gives in places you'd rather keep tight. "You hear it," Grivven said from the doorway, carrying a pewter cup that smelled of sour and poppy. He moved like a man who had learned the floor the way you learn a lover, where it likes pressure, where it complains. "I hear something." He set the cup on the table. "For sleep." "For dreaming," I said, and did not drink. "For not waking the rope," he corrected and turned his head a little, listening toward the back wall as if the house was speaking through a knot of sinew in his neck. "It's a hungry night." "What did you tie?" I asked him, and he did not pretend not to know what I meant. Men who live in houses like this one do not have much use for pretense when it comes in from the rain. "A name," he said. "Not a person, not a beast. A name that eats fates. Since when do names eat?" He had a smile in him somewhere, and I think it had been kind once. It came and went in his eyes the way storms pass over fields that have learned patience from the earth. Since we started feeding them. He tapped the wood with one knuckle, gentle as a bell. "This is Saint Twine down there. It holds if you speak to it in the voice of the verse that remembers why it was made. When a death is due, the name pulls. I let it take the moment and not the man." "You sell mercy," I said. "I budget it," he answered, and for a heartbeat he looked not like a keeper but like a debtor who has learned the shape of every coin in the dark with his tongue. He told me not to step on the seam. He told me to keep my mouth shut when I slept, because names are doors, and doors are mouths, and if you snore at the wrong moment, the world learns more about you than you meant to give it. "You collect teeth," I said, because the bundles on the shelf had been glaring at my curiosity since I came in. "The unclaimed," he said. "I keep one for each, ledger work. The rope is a poor bookkeeper. It counts what it eats and forgets what it saved." He glanced toward a nail where one tooth hung alone, new and blood pink at the root. "I mark my mistakes and my luck the same way. It reminds me to be wary of both." There was a cough in the hall then, wet, heavy, a sound that had learned the habit of ending. Grivven listened with his eyes closed, head tilted, fingers measuring something in the air only he could feel. "Room 3, he murmured to the ceiling. "Not yet." His head turned toward my wall. "Room 5. Soon." "You're sure?" I asked. "About endings, yes," he said. "About worth, number." He looked at me. "When it pulls, keep your mouth shut. Names are doors." "And mouths," I said. He nodded, this time like a man might when the priest says something to the altar and the altar chooses for once to answer as a friend. Then he left me to my seam and my thoughts and the cup I would not drink. There is a sound to a house that knows it has done what it was built to do. There is a sound to a man who has spent his mercy and is still counting. I waited with both. I set a small red stone of my own on the sill, a habit I carry from places where the dead leave their appetites behind like lanterns in a fog, and watched the glass fog around it in a circle the way breath fogs a mirror when you are not sure you are the one breathing. When it was time, the house told us so. Grivven passed my door with a sheet over one arm and less weight in his shadow than he had carried when he went the other way. He did not knock on the door he opened. He did not speak the name of the man inside. He touched the seam at the foot of the cot with 2 fingers, and the wood flexed in answer like a patient animal lifting its head at last for the hand it trusts to stroke it the right way. "Easy," he murmured into a room where the air was already thin. "We've been saving this for you." I stood at the threshold and watched without entering. The man on the marked bed had the waxen look of a candle that has known it was going to gutter for a while and has become philosophical about it. His chest lifted and fell with all the effort of a boat that loved the shore too much. Beside him, a girl sat with a scarf twisted between her fingers. She had the eyes of someone who has already been more brave than she will be thanked for. Grivven set the sheet within reach and drew a chalk circle at the headboard, the old mark renewed so often the board had become the sigil as much as the chalk. "Hold his hand," he told the girl, and his voice was a kindness that had learned thrift. "Don't call him back." "Back?" she asked. "Very young, very old, from the edge." The seam tightened in the floor. It is difficult to explain to someone who has not heard it, and easy to remember once you have. The way a rope speaks through wood when it begins to learn the shape of a weight. On the inhale, a tiny pull that sinks through knots as if a finger had plucked them. On the exhale, the ghost of slack. The house was listening the way a midwife listens. Not to decide, only to be ready for the exact moment when help can be help and not harm. "What verse do you keep?" I asked in a whisper, because the air had made a church out of the room, and it would have been a sin not to sing when invited. Grivven's eyes went far and near at once. He put his hand on the baseboard where a small wooden cleat had been worn smooth by more years than I would like to count. His lips shaped a rhythm more than words at first. The tone older than the language, the way you might remember a prayer after forgetting who taught it to you. Then the words came, old ash flavored with fear and defiance both. The shepherd of men, Teragnis, in fear of the maw, carved 5 chains of sacred law. The last was the cruelest. Feast not on your own, but the body is a gate, and the gate was meant to open. He did not speak it loudly. He did not need to. The rope listens to tone more than volume. I have found that to be true of people also. The boards under his hand relaxed a fraction. Not enough to look like mercy, but enough to feel like it. The girl bowed her head without knowing why. The dying man's breath shortened, then steadied as if he had been allowed to choose his footing for the last step. When the moment came, it was like a bird deciding not to land after all. The chest rose. The chest did not fall. The seam drew tight and held as if a knot had clenched its teeth. There was a sound, the length of a heartbeat, no more, like a dry winch being given one turn by a hand that knows exactly what it is doing. Then it was finished. The rope let go the way a good hand lets go after a child has learned to stand. The girl kissed the man's brow and did not cry out. Some people cannot bear to let the tide take what the tide came for. She was not one of those. She left with the scarf and a story she could tell without anything chewing on it from within. Grivven stood carefully, as if his bones had become not heavier but more honest about the weight they carried. In the common room he slid a bundle off the shelf, untied it, selected a tooth the color of old bone and tied it to the little brass nail beside the new one, the pink not yet gone from the root. Two together now and accounting in a language that does not lie to itself as easily as we do. "You asked, what lies tied?" he said to me, when we were alone again and the house had gone back to pretending it was only wood and rope and habit, a mercy, with teeth. He finally blinked. I say that like a joke, but I am not joking. It was the blink of a man at the end of a long column of numbers who has discovered, to his small surprise, that the ledger balances, if you are careful, what constitutes a loss. We sat at a table with the vinegar between us, and I asked him how he had learned the knot. He told me an old woman had taught him to count properly. She had run an inn like this before this one remembered its own name. She had known that the floor is the only honest book. She had taught him to listen to the rope with his hands, and to the dying with his silence. "Most men count coins," he said. "She counted ends, said someone had to." The verse he had found scratched on a chapel beam half burned he had learned by tone, the way a door knows who is at home by the weight of their step. "What do you get out of it?" I asked, and it was not a cynical question. "I've learned that devotions without payments are usually lies in better clothes." "What I don't deserve," he said. 30 years without a blink." He tapped the table twice. The floor answered with a single tap, obedient and bored. "It costs to not scream with them," he said softly. "You pay. Or someone else does. Best it be me where I can see the math. And when you die?" "I'll sleep in that particular cot," he said without ceremony. "Let the knot take me. Better one rotten meal than a banquet." "You believe in the Glutton Below?" I asked. My tone might have been curious, but the scar under it had old teeth. "If you don't," he said, "it believes in you." We did not speak for a while. Silence is an instrument most men play badly. Grivven played it like a person who had lived his life in houses that listened. I set a small bone token on the table between us. He did not touch it. "Don't speak that where anyone can hear," he said. "Words eat too." "You keep saying names are doors," I said. "What does this one say when you open it?" "Not much," he answered. "It swallows nouns, leaves verbs." "Efficient," I said in spite of myself. "Mercy is when the verb left is keep," he said, and that was the closest I came to seeing him smile as anything other than a problem with the light. He told me to sleep, and I tried. The house had the restful stillness of a field after harvest. The seam under the cot was slack, the boards cool. Pre-dawn has a way of making the world look undecided and honest at once. I set my palm on the seam and thanked the floor. It knocked once in return. One small courtesy between professionals. I met the girl again in the common room. She held an empty cup like a thing that might yet be filled. She said he had not struggled. I said he had not needed to. She said she did not like this place. Grivven said she did not have to. She thanked him. He said she was welcome. Most prayers, if they are worth anything, sound very much like those 4 sentences, and are spoken between people who don't consider themselves holy. I thanked him too, though not in the same words. "Leave the red stone on the sill," he told me as I shouldered my pack. "The house likes presents." I did as asked. The glass fogged in a little ring around it, though the room was cold. There was a small pleasure in the act that I could not fully explain to myself. Sometimes the old gestures are worth more than the meanings we dress them in later. "Will you be all right?" I asked, knowing the question has rotten roots and grows crooked, but asking it anyway in the hope that the leaves might throw a little shade on the road ahead. "No one is all right," he said, "but some are tied." He looked at me as a man looks when he is speaking to a stranger who has confessed to the same illness. "You have the look of a man traveling with a story on the hook." "I'm collecting how the world ended," I said. "It is an answer that fills the mouth without feeding the body." "It hasn't," he said. "Its ending takes longer if you listen." "I do," I said. "Then sleep when you can," he said. "The floors had its meal." At the door, I asked him to repeat the riddle he had given me when I came in, because sometimes saying the knot aloud helps the hands remember how to tie it. "Keep your mouth shut when you sleep," he said. And I asked what one should do when one speaks. "Don't," he said, "unless it's a knot." Outside day had begun to think about itself. The knot sign swung and the rope did not move. The red stones on the thresholds caught the least light any sun has ever bothered to spare us. I turned back when he said my name in a way that made it feel like a coat I was still getting used to wearing. "If a name asks you to open," he said, "ask it what it keeps." "And if it answers you?" I asked. "With you," he said, "tie tighter." I left Lekar by the road the rain had left for me and thought about ropes. Some are for climbing, some for leading, some for binding. Mercy is a rope. It burns the hands that hold it. I have scars for every kindness I have managed not to abandon, and I do not regret a single one. A man who sings the end of the world must keep his hands in working order. I will tell you something that I did not say to Grivven, because there is no reason to make a counter of a confessor. The night before I came to his door, I slept beside a well that breathes and dreamed a dream that has followed me too long to be only mine. In the dream, a table without end was set in a hall with no walls, and there was a place at the head of it where a face should have been, and wasn't. When I woke, I had the taste of spoiled honey and burnt marrow in my mouth, and a word I cannot pronounce sitting on my tongue like a stone someone else put there. I have not yet tied my knot tight enough around it, but I am learning. We are all learning, in our way. There are beds for sleeping and beds for leaving. In the knotted cot there is one of each, and the rope between them is a prayer that knows the names of the saints and does not ask for anything it cannot keep. If ever you come to Lekar, leave a red stone on the sill and your shoes by the door. If Grivven tells you to keep your mouth shut while you sleep, do it. If he tells you that names are doors and doors are mouths, believe him. If you hear the floor counting, let it. Numbers are kinder than most of the gods we buried when the sky fell. And if, in the quiet after a passing, you hear a tiny knock under the boards like a polite guest at the wrong door, knock back once. It is good to be polite to the tools of mercy. They fail us less often than we fail each other. I walk on. I carry what I can. I keep what I must. The rope burns. The song holds. Book of the Fifth breaking. Verse 5.7. We eat, not in greed but in reverence. We eat to become. Each bone cracked is a prayer. Each marrow tasted is a psalm.